so much, and guten Morgen, learn that, and good morning to everyone else. So as he mentioned, I'm the COO from UrbanSitter, and UrbanSitter, I want to tell you a little bit about us because we're a special kind of marketplace. Let me make sure it's working. Great. So we're delivering the most trusted childcare marketplace in the United States. So what does that mean? Trust is important to every business, particularly in the consumer space. Every business is going to tell you it's the cornerstone of what they do. But I have a question for all of you. Please raise your hand if you have children. Okay, some of you. Of that group, please raise your hand if you've ever hired a child care provider, like a sitter or a nanny, on the internet or through an app. It's a much smaller group. And this is because childcare, these are your children. This isn't necessarily, I think maybe I'll stand here, a rational use case, right? So if you buy a pair of sneakers from eBay and those sneakers show up and they're a little bit defective, that's annoying and that's frustrating. But if you're finding a childcare provider for your child and something goes wrong, that's a big deal. So if you have, for example, blitz scaling, it's really a fantastic thing if your business and your market can support that. But when you're dealing with such a trust-dependent use case, you have to have so much thought and care around how you scale and how you deliver an amazing experience. Sorry. Am I in the way? I am in the way. Okay. A little bit about us. We were founded in 2011 by 3 female entrepreneurs who are also moms. And they decided that this product needed to exist in the world. They had too much trouble finding trusted childcare. We're based in San Francisco. We have a satellite office in Portland. We have over 1 million members now with millions of hours transacted on the platform. We have a subscription pricing model, which is a bit unique in the marketplace space, but it works really well for us. So parents basically pay on a monthly or an annual basis for access to the platform. And it all adds up at the end of the day to a life-changing product on both sides of the marketplace. So for parents, it helps them, particularly moms, get to work that day if their nanny is sick, for example. Or it helps sitters, again, primarily women on the supply side of the marketplace, earn the essential income that they need to live in an expensive city like San Francisco. Am I on the right thing? So how do we do this? How do we establish trust online at scale? This is really our special sauce. So we unlock a parent's network to provide them with trusted recommendations. So what happens is when a parent joins UrbanSitter, they tell us where their kids go to school, they tell us what parenting groups they're a part of, they tell us what neighborhoods they're a part of. They also can connect with Facebook, or they can connect with LinkedIn. And so we have this social graph in the experience itself that we then use to show them sitters that have been recommended by other people in their social network. So even if a parent doesn't know someone directly, they think that if they see a parent who recommended a sitter from their church, for example, that they know that they have the same values. So they're much more likely to trust that recommendation versus, for example, something on Yelp, right? And you see a review on Yelp and it's 5 stars, that doesn't have that much meaning anymore because who's this person? You have no idea who they are. And we see this in the data. So if a parent is connected to a group, they book at 2.5 times the rate as a parent who is not. So social proof is incredibly important to UrbanSitter building trust online at scale. So today, and I know a question came up before around defensibility in the marketplace and building defensibility. For us, it's this social graph that's highly defensible. It's taken us years to have extremely local knowledge in every single one of our markets around parent groups, around schools. Like we know in any given city what every single daycare is, so that when a parent comes in for the first time, they're able to find that daycare that their kid goes to, and they feel like this experience is localized and personalized for them. The other form of social proof I wanted to talk about, because it can come in many forms, is something called a repeat family badge. And this is unique in that if a parent hires a sitter once, even if they give them a 5-star review, that's somewhat meaningful. But if they hire them a second time, then that's incredibly meaningful. And we hear from parents over and over again that this is one of the most important forms of social proof that we have. So I would say for whatever marketplace you're in, really think about what's your version of a repeat family badge, because it's incredibly important to us. So I wanted to share a couple thoughts and best practices around our playbook for geographic expansion. And this is for all of the entrepreneurs in the room that know that when you stand up here and you give a few slides, it sounds so easy and it's all baked and everything's great and brilliant. But then when you're actually doing it, it's hard. And building a marketplace is really hard. And I applaud everyone here who's trying to do it. So here's some hard-won best practices that we had. There's some specifics in here. Of course, take it with a grain of salt because every market is different. But this will show you a little bit about how we got to that defensible position with a large social graph on the site. Okay, so phase one. It all started in San Francisco. Who's been there, by the way? Lots of you. Great. Well, I hope you come. It's a beautiful city. And our goal there was to prove, first and foremost, do parents and sitters want to connect this way? Like, this is at all a better product than what's already in the marketplace. We don't know. And so we wanted to make sure that we could deliver these trusted referrals online. We had a few assets at the time, and these are incredibly noteworthy because I'm sure many of you would fall into this category. Basically, there was a vision, there was a founder insight that we could use the social graph and bring a lot of offline behavior online. So in the childcare marketplace in particular in the United States, even to this day, people find sitters through their networks. Basically, they call their friends, they go to their preschool, and they ask their teachers. Like, it's all organic, it's all offline today. And so our goal was to bring it online using some new technology. They were scrappy entrepreneurs. They were so incredibly resourceful with how they got this off the ground. So a really fun story that I like to share about our CEO is just like brilliant and so much grit and such an awesome growth mindset. Finding space, commercial space in San Francisco is a really hard thing to do. It's incredibly expensive. And so what she did was she looked at all of the acquisitions that were happening in the market, assuming that the acquired company would soon move out of their space and go to the acquirer's location. And in fact, she was correct and ended up finding one company that was about to move out and then sold us all of the office furniture, for example, for $1. Like, it was a brilliant thing. And so it was these types of really resourceful, scrappy behavior in those early days that helped things get off the ground. And then the last thing about San Francisco, especially at this time and even to this day, it's a city of early adopters. So there are a lot of people who are at least willing to give something a try for the first time. So what was the playbook back then? We started as free. Like, do people even want this? Like, let's forget about monetization. Do people want to do this at all? We had a grassroots field team. So we had these local sales ambassadors, basically, that were out in the city forming local partnerships with all of the moms groups, with all of the schools. There were referral programs in place. That was a really big part of the acquisition strategy to start. And that was all on the demand side. And then on the sitter side, sitters adopted this platform really fast. And it's to this day been an amazing asset for us. But it primarily started with sitter recruiting at colleges. So going to the local colleges and putting signs up at the job board. And then it became, online job boards. And it was really a fantastic way of getting sitters onto the platform. And what we found also was the word of mouth in the sitter community was tremendous. And I can think back when I was in college, I know that I had a lot of time to be really social and tell my friends everything. And in fact, this turned out to be true here. So it worked in San Francisco. And one thing that I should also mention is even though we were free for a time, we did relatively quickly start introducing payment or pricing. We wanted to see, okay, now that we know people will actually use this product, will they pay to use it? Because it's a completely different side. It's a completely different question. And we had to iterate quite a bit on pricing. And even to this day, I'd say we haven't completely unlocked the model, and we continue to iterate on price optimization. And so that you could also monetize the supply side, you can monetize the demand side. But for us, we got it to a point where, yes, people were willing to pay for this product, and we decided, all right, it's time to expand. And we decided to expand into 8 markets across the United States. And there were 8 of the biggest markets in the United States. And the good news was it worked. It worked really well, actually. But at the same time, when we finally were in these markets and we had traction and people were paying, we realized, wow, this is actually pretty expensive. And so for us to scale in the next wave to the next 50 cities, we need to figure out a new playbook. We need to figure out, how do we bring our cost to acquire down? I think unit economics were mentioned in the last panel, and they were so incredibly important. So for us, we went through this whole exercise of figuring out, how can we get our unit economics in line? And we ultimately did. We brought down our cost to acquire by almost 80% by some pretty significant shifts in our marketing and our product strategy. So once we had that in place, then we got to phase 2. So phase 2 was really solving for trust now at scale and doing so cost effectively. So we wanted to make sure that the business really worked. And when we brought those unit economics in line, I should say this is what enabled us to actually raise our Series C, which we raised about a year ago. And the theme down below there is we started with a very decentralized approach. It was incredibly local. So we had these massive field teams in each one of the markets. But then we started to centralize. As we tried to get more cost effective, we kept some local representation, like actual feet on the street in each one of these markets, but we also centralized a lot, and it ended up bringing a lot of operational efficiency to the company. Okay, so I put this slide in, and I know there's this tension and there's no perfect answer. And so you can hear a blitz scaling panel or Uber, who had an amazing speech early in the day. But basically, the real question is, are you ready to scale? Like, are you ready to do this? Do you have sound financials? Do you have a playbook that you think is working in the markets that you're already in? Is there a team in place? Do you have good people? Are there learnings from your existing markets that you can leverage? And I know this goes against potentially blitz scale as fast as you possibly can. So you'll have to figure out what that right balance is, but I think these are really important questions to have your eyes wide open about. Okay, so now for this playbook in phase 2. It's not rocket science at all, for us. It was 4 primary steps, and I'll walk you through some of these specifics. All right, market selection. So everybody has a model, right? Everybody has their model. Uber was talking about a model that they used for 5 to 6 years, and then ultimately they then took that to become, if a city has more than 1 million people, we'll expand there. Like, the world is our oyster. And the world really is your oyster. But for smaller companies who potentially don't have as much capital, you need to be more strategic about where you go. And so here are the buckets of things that we looked at, that we built our model off of. So hopefully this can be helpful. For example, psychographic characteristics. So being a consumer company, we wanted to know, are the psychographics of our target customer present in these new markets? So things for us, and this was a few years ago at this time, you might have heard, I think, mentioned before, we looked at companies like TaskRabbit and Instacart. So they were just getting started, and they were starting to train the market on on-demand services. So we talked about how important childcare is, and getting someone to trust childcare is going to come after just getting someone using an on-demand service in general. So we're looking for a willingness to adopt on-demand technology. We looked at several other factors as well that were important to our business. We also looked at demographics, for example. Obviously, I'm sure all of you have your bullseye customer, you have your personas on the wall, you know who they are, and you know where they live. So figuring out where they are. Then, UrbanSitter was a bit unique in that although we were only marketing in a few places, we made a strategic decision to actually have the platform available to other cities where we were not actively spending in. And we saw some interesting activity happen as a result of that. On the negative, of course, is that those people weren't necessarily having an optimal experience, right? Because it was a little bit of a free-for-all. But the positive was we saw parents and particularly sitters move. And so we would have sitters from San Francisco who had incredible profiles. They had all these repeat family badges. They had tons of reviews. It was like great looking sitters that would move to new markets, and they might go to Portland, Oregon, or they would go to Phoenix, or they'd go to Cincinnati, like these random places. And then just organically, we would see bookings happen. Like all of a sudden, somehow through SEO or PR, like there would be signs of life in a market. And so we had this great playbook of, wow, where are there signs of life that we can pour the marketing fuel into? Strategic value, so partnerships, of course, were an important consideration for us. We had, for example, one of our earliest markets in the next wave was Portland. And we had a strategic partner up there who wanted to offer UrbanSitter as a corporate benefit to all of its employees. So fortunately, we had everything else in place as well, and this strategic partner helped us expand up there. And then, of course, regulatory considerations. I think, Uber is a great example of this. Worker classification are real issues in many marketplaces. Privacy considerations. Basically, is it enough? Do you understand the market well enough that you can be successful? Have you reached out to the mayor? I thought that was a great story from the Uber presentation before as well. Are you prepared for the regulations in any given market? Because certainly in the United States, and I would suspect it's similar here too, because there's been a lack of federal legislation and cohesive federal legislation, there's a lot happening at the state and local level that you have to be aware of. Oh, and the last point on this slide is just what we found to be really helpful was expanding in waves. So we would expand, we'd learn, we'd grow, and then we'd iterate. So it took us a few cycles to really get the playbook nailed. Okay, phase 2. Now that we figured out where to go, we had to prime the market, because we do want, once we launch officially, we want each person, and we want as much as possible that parent number one in that market to have a great experience and really appreciate the benefit of what UrbanSitter is bringing. So we started with supply. And in terms of recruiting supply, there were a few things that we did that worked really well. So we knew we had some proven acquisition channels, like going to colleges, some of the online job boards. They worked really well for us, and word of mouth and referral programs. But we also had a lot of data science that we had figured out in terms of what is the critical threshold of supply in any given market so that we can turn demand on, and that demand will be met, or at least has a good chance of being met. So we figured out what those critical thresholds were. We leveraged our proven acquisition channels, and we also really bent over backwards to make this initial set of supply successful. So for example, we are always onboarding sitters in any market at any time, but we wanted to set expectations with this group of sitters that you are the first group of sitters in this market. And by doing that and letting them know it's going to be several weeks until the first parent comes and books you, and we gave them the tools and we gave them the learning. And probably the best thing that we did was we leveraged our existing supply in the markets that we were already in. And so we had, again, pretty simple but effective, we had a Facebook group. So we had a Facebook group for all of our sitters. And all of those sitters were helping each other so that they can go on and say, how do I get my first job? And how important is it to have a video on my profile? And is it better to get paid with cash or credit? And how do all of these things work? And so we really leveraged our existing supply to help train our new supply. We had formal mentor programs and all that as well. So the second part of priming the market for us, and this is probably unique to us, but it was an incredibly challenging part of the equation, was delivering on the social network value proposition on day one, right? So as anyone knows, if you go to the social network of any kind and you're the first person there, it's lonely, right? It's a pretty lonely place to be. Similarly, in a marketplace, if you recruit all the supply but there's no demand, and if you have all the demand and there's supply, it's also a lonely place to be. So how do we deliver on this value proposition? So what we did was we developed deep local knowledge about the markets that we were going into. And we ended up just talking to some of the parents and some of the sitters in those markets. And they were friends of friends, just again, being really scrappy, really resourceful. How do we figure out what are the parenting groups that all of these moms are a part of? Where are they going for daycare? Where are they finding all of their childcare solutions? And we made sure all of that was already loaded into the site. And we hadn't done that in San Francisco. for example. That was much more organic in the early days, but we realized that was critical for when a parent comes to the site for the first time. When they see their kids' preschool, there's a moment of delight. They're like, oh, you get me. You know, you're in Portland. And so building that social presence in from day one was incredibly important for us. Then we had to recruit the early adopters in any given market. So when talking to those people, we quickly realized who the influential parents were, who the mommy bloggers were, who the people were that were influencing behavior in a market. And we gave them free membership. We're like, okay, come, free, try it. Book sitters, we'll pay you to give them a review, to be active on the platform. And by having that, we increased the likelihood and the probability that a new parent coming in would see social proof in the market. They would see a sitter with repeat family badges that we talked about before, or they would see a sitter that you were connected to. Finally, launch. Time to turn the sign on. Someone once referred to marketing, and it stuck with me, as lighter fuel, that you have to have a great product and you have to have word of mouth going, and then when you turn the paid marketing on, it's literally just lighter fuel onto an existing fire that helps it grow. And so that's how we always thought about it. And at this point, now we're ready for lighter fuel. So of course, it's so obvious, but it's important to state again, when you're doing something new, when you're entering a market and trying to disrupt offline behavior and bring it all online, you have to explain why. Why is this interesting? Why should you do this? We had proven acquisition channels from that first set of 9 markets. We turned those on, and we localized the experience as much as possible. So simple things like when you come to the site saying, hello, parent from Nashville, it's great to see you, creates that delight for consumers. Leverage supply to drive demand. To the extent possible, this is always genius, and like Etsy was amazing at doing this, is they had all of an eBay, they had all the sellers that would then go and recruit demand. What we found in our marketplace, and what you might find as well, the reason we had such strong product market fit on the sitter side was because they didn't have access to demand. And so they were really interesting in finding families. So full disclosure, this was only limited value for us, but I put it here because I think it's so important that if you can tap into that, it's a winning strategy. For us, it didn't work out quite as well, but I'm sure for some of you it will. Reaching out to the influencers, we talked about that, and then leveraging promotions and incentives, so free trial, referral incentives, give, get, free babysitting credit, things like that. Okay, so learn and grow. So anyone who's ever worked with me will tell you one of my mantras is about building a culture of continuous learning and improvement. It's so incredibly important to constantly and quickly learn and grow. And there's an adage that I'm sure you all have heard about failing fast. I actually don't like that adage at all because I think it's not about failing fast. I think it's about learn fast. Failure is fine as long as you've learned something from it. But in order to learn, you need to be tracking what's important, right? And leveraging tools like data science to apply constant learning and improvement. So again, wanted to show you how we thought about it. We had some top-level metrics for the business, of course, like revenue, right? How much money we were making, user adoption, were people actually using this thing, was there liquidity? But then at a market-by-market level, operationally speaking, we were looking at metrics on a city-by-city basis. And they fell into these categories I wanted to share. So there was a few metrics around the health of supply. Did we have enough of the supply? Did we have the right kind of supply? So if you have never hired a babysitter before, you might not know there's a huge spectrum around the type of sitter. Do you have certifications in working with infants? Do you have certifications in working with special needs children? They're all different kinds. We had to make sure we had the right kind. And then were they activated in the way that we wanted them to be? Were they engaged? Or were they sticking around? What was their lifetime value? Then similarly, a whole basket of metrics around demand. So the demand side of the marketplace. Are we acquiring, activating, engaging parents in the way that we want them to be? And then supply-demand ratios. So in any given market, if you have a ton of supply and very little demand, that doesn't work. If you have a bunch of demand and very little supply, that most likely isn't going to work. So you have to have the right balance between them, and you have to have it at a hyper-local level, which gets me to this next column, which we call liquidity. So you need to have liquidity in a marketplace. You need to have transactions that are actually happening, of course. And in looking at these metrics, we were able to identify some interesting things. So for example, Los Angeles is a huge city, huge. And Los Angeles, we were thinking about it as one market, but of course within Los Angeles, there's like 10 different sub-markets. And some of them were doing really well, and the playbook was working, and then some of them needed a little extra attention and needed a few different types of supply. And so we were able to, at a hyper-local level, get LA working really, really well. But it was only because we looked at a detailed level of what was going on in LA that we were able to make it successful. I should also add at this point, there were markets that we pulled out of. So I don't know if any of you have been to Las Vegas, but it's a very interesting market. And it was unlike any of the other markets that we were in. Just use your imagination and think of what are the types of babysitting engagements that might be happening, and what are the locations that might be happening, and what are the sitters that are available. It was very different than anywhere else. And so we decided what happens in Vegas should stay in Vegas, and we pulled out. So we're like, okay, we are not ready for Las Vegas. Maybe when we are bigger and we are better funded, we will come back to Las Vegas, but for now we're out. So be willing to also, I guess the message here is to leave a market. So you might find after expanding into it that you're not ready, or it's not ready for you. And then of course growth. Were we growing in the way we wanted to be? I'm sorry. Great. So using this playbook, we scaled from 9 to 50 markets across the United States in less than 18 months. And we were able to empower parents and sitters both to lead fuller lives. And also wanted to share, rest assured, the kids had a lot of fun in this process too. So wanted to show you a little video that perhaps the parents in the audience can relate to as to why this service is life-changing for parents and so incredibly important. So I think if I hit, it's going to help me do it. One moment. Was it not working? This is a really cute video. I'll send it around. Oh no. Okay, well, I'll tell you about it. Basically, as you can see from this picture, they're throwing flour at each other. And it's one of those moments where you realize you just need a break as a parent. So I'm sure many of the parents can relate to that. Anyway, with all of that said, I hope that there were some food for thought in there, and that if you have any questions at all, I'm happy to answer them now, or I'm also happy to take them later or offline, email me. I know building a marketplace, I know from experience, is really hard. And it's different for every single person and every single company. So good luck, and I know you're going to kill it. Yes.
Thanks for the great presentation. And the question is, when are you coming to Europe?
We don't have plans yet to come to Europe, but it is on the radar probably for the next couple of years. We really want to get it figured out in the United States, but it's interesting. We've had some inbound interest from a few key cities, London actually being one of them. So we think it would be a great fit for London as well, if not other places. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Hello. Very nice presentation. I have a question concerning retaining the people that work for you, because once they booked for the first time, the question is, won't they do some own trading and say, okay, come next week and I paid you maybe the full amount or whatever, and you avoid any... How do you deal with that? How do you try to retain the people on the platform?
Such a good question. Yes, so disintermediation does happen to a limited extent, but the few tactics that we use to prevent this are the following. One, sitters have a really strong incentive to keep the bookings on the platform because it improves their reputation. So they get those things like repeat family badges, they get reviews, they increase their total number of bookings, and it's all of those signals that get them hired again by other families. So the sitters themselves have a strong incentive to keep it on. The incentive that is powerful for both parents and sitters is that we manage booking and payment. So all of the scheduling and the payment at the end of the night, when you're a parent, you come home, maybe you're a little drunk and you trying to find change, like who knows what's happening at the end of the night. What we do is take all of that away. All you have to do is say, thank you very much, I'll see you later, and then we handle all of the payment and the tip, and both parents and sitters have told us that that's a better experience for them, and so that's another strong incentive to keep it on the platform. Yes, you had a question?
You talked about the importance of data and tracking. I mentioned you used a lot of offline channels, especially in the beginning.
I can't hear you. Can you say that again?
You talked about the importance of data and tracking. I imagine you used a lot of offline channels, especially in the beginning. How did you track the performance of those channels?
Yes. So we did it through codes in the very beginning. So when we had these local partnerships in place with, the Purple Moms group and the Nashville Spring Hill Moms and all of those types of communities, they would have a specific referral code so that we knew who was coming from where. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question as well. How did your team look like for building that playbook? Have you had a separate team who was just focusing on that, or was it split up in different teams?
We had, in terms of building the playbook, it was a cross-functional team across marketing, product, engineering, and member services. And we pulled that all together and we iterated on it together. We also, in those early days, had a vast grassroots field marketing team. So there were people, as I said, on feet on the street in every single one of these markets. And then over time, we realized that had limited scalability. So while we still had some local presence and people, it was nowhere near what it was in the early days. So that team actually ended up shrinking. Questions? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.